Have you ever thought people respect you because you always listen, explain, and try to please? What if every time you explained yourself, you made yourself cheaper? Here's the truth. The more you try to clarify, the more power you give away. In the game of power, the one who speaks first is always weaker. You thought you were being understood, but what they really loved was how easily they could predict you. Power doesn't come from what you say. It comes from your ability to say nothing when everyone expects you to react, and the day you learn to disappear without apology, without warning, that's the day no one dares to disrespect you again. Have you been in that moment? Someone hurts you, and suddenly you're expected to explain your silence. You're expected to fix their discomfort, to protect their feelings, to justify the fact that you're done, but not anymore. Today, you'll learn the most brutal truth Machiavelli ever taught. Saying nothing is the most powerful move in the entire game. When someone attacks you, what's your first instinct? To explain, to defend, to clear your name, to make sure they get it right. But here's the trap. The moment you feel obligated to explain, you've already agreed to their judgment. You type a long response. You replay the situation in your head. You second-guess yourself. You try to stay calm, to fix it, to be the bigger person. But every sentence you send, you're not clarifying anything. You're begging for permission to exist. You think reacting makes you strong. But what if it's just a symptom of conditioning? Since childhood, you were trained to respond, to keep the peace, to stay liked, to never make anyone uncomfortable. So now, every time someone accuses you, you flinch. They don't need evidence. Just tone, just sarcasm, just one passive-aggressive comment to make you unravel yourself. And what do? You explain, you reassure, you apologize for things you didn't even do. Not because you're wrong, but because you've been trained to think that silence equals guilt. But Machiavelli would tell you, guilt doesn't come from silence. It comes from reacting like you've done something wrong. You're not defending your truth. You're defending their comfort. And that's not power. That's performance. And the more predictable your reaction, the easier it is to keep you on a leash. But Machiavelli never played predictable. And in just a moment, you'll see why he chose silence over defense, and how he used withdrawal to win wars without drawing a sword. Have you ever walked away from a conversation without saying a word, and the room suddenly felt colder? That wasn't awkwardness, that was power. Machiavelli once wrote, "A prince must know how to disappear without losing his influence." He wasn't talking about escape. He meant vanishing as a calculated move, not to hide, but to make them face the silence you leave behind. Because silence, when intentional, becomes a mirror. They don't just notice you're gone. They notice what they lost access to. They don't miss your love. They miss the control they used to have over you. They miss being able to summon you at will. They miss how easily they could trigger a reaction. But you used to be on call, quick to reply, quick to fix things, quick to offer peace, at the cost of your own. You thought that made you a good person. It didn't. It made you predictable, and predictable men are the easiest to manipulate. Machiavelli had a name for it. Weakness disguised as virtue. You believed being always available made you valuable. But the truth is brutal. Scarcity is the bedrock of influence. And when you're always there, you become background noise. It's not your kindness they loved. It's how reliably they could access it. So stop showing up like a free service. Stop donating yourself to people who only see your presence as their right. Don't disappear because you're hurt. Disappear because it's strategic. Return only when it strengthens you, not as the man who explains, not as the man who begs to be understood, but as a sovereign force that cannot be summoned, because your silence now says more than your explanations ever did. And when used correctly, silence doesn't just remove you from their game, it flips the board. But why are people so addicted to keeping you reactive? Let's take a deeper look at the emotional blueprint that makes them panic when you finally go quiet. Since childhood, you were trained to be liked. Be polite. Explain yourself. Say yes. Don't make waves. Be the bigger person. And now, that conditioning still runs your life. You feel guilty when you don't reply. You feel cold when you don't explain. You feel selfish when you protect your peace. But none of that is true. You weren't being good. You were being programmed. And that programming, it was never meant to protect you. It was meant to make you predictable, because people don't need power over the strong. They just need consistency over the compliant. That's why they panic when you go quiet. Because silence doesn't just remove you. It removes the script they use to control you. They used to know exactly what to say, to get a reply, a smile, an explanation, an apology. But now, you've interrupted the pattern. And pattern interruption is the first step toward breaking psychological control. They call it ghosting. Machiavelli calls it something else. A silence that reflects their dependence back at them. Because in your silence, they're not just missing access, they're confronting how addicted they were to it. They don't fear losing you. They fear what they become without your compliance. That's why they call you cold. That's why they say you've changed. But here's the truth. They're not angry because you're distant. They're angry because you're no longer predictable. The man who is always available is never feared. And the man who is not feared is always controlled. So when you finally withdraw, you're not creating chaos. You're revealing the chaos they kept hidden behind your willingness to serve. But it's not enough to go silent. To take control, you need to weaponize it. And now you'll see how silence isn't just defense. It's your next offensive move. Most men think silence is retreat. That disappearing makes them weak. That not responding looks like surrender. But that's not what Machiavelli taught. He saw silence as inversion, a psychological flip that turns weakness into dominance. Think of it this way. When someone yells, and you don't flinch, they look unstable, not powerful. When someone insults you in public, and you smile without reacting, you've just flipped the dynamic. Because now, you're no longer defending your image. You're forcing them to question theirs. The man who explains himself becomes predictable, but the one who withholds becomes dangerous. That's the Machiavellian trick, to reverse the emotional pressure from yourself onto them. Let them wonder what you're thinking. Let them panic over your calm. Let them destroy themselves. In the silence, you refuse to break. You think disappearing makes you forgettable. It doesn't. It makes you unforgettable. Because now, they remember how you made them feel when they could no longer read you. Most people don't want resolution. They want control. And when you don't give it to them, they spiral. They text more. They push harder. They accuse louder. Not because you're wrong, but because their manipulation isn't working anymore. This is how you flip the power. You stop reacting. You start watching. And when the moment is right, you respond not with emotion, but but with precision. That's not cowardice. That's psychological siege warfare. Let them burn out. You conserve. Let them speak first. You hold frame, because the one who speaks last wins. And now that the board has flipped, you'll need a new aura, an energy inviolable, that people second guess before they even approach you. The man who cannot be read, cannot be ruled. That's the aura you must now build, an energy so silent, it speaks louder than any defense ever could. Because silence, real silence, is not the absence of sound. It's the presence of control. It's the pause before the storm, the stillness before a calculated strike. Most people talk to fill space. They over-explain, overshare, overreact, thinking noise is strength. But Machiavelli knew the wise man does not lie. He simply withholds. Why? Because the less you reveal, the more others reveal themselves. Silence exposes people. It stretches the air until they fill it with their own fears, their own projections, their own insecurities. You don't even have to speak. You just have to vanish from the game. Let them spiral. Let them panic. Let them reveal their desperation. As they try to decode your stillness, they'll call you distant, cold, cruel. But that's not your burden, because what they call cold is just you no longer begging to be understood. What they call arrogance is just the absence of self-betrayal. You don't owe explanations. You don't owe access. And every time you hold your silence, instead of reacting, you build something most men never develop. Mystery. And mystery is magnetic. They can't stop thinking about what you're thinking. They replay the last thing you said. They obsess over what you didn't say. Because silence is no longer emptiness. It's presence. It's power, compressed and unreadable. And in a world of noise, the man who controls silence controls attention. But silence alone is not enough. To make it unforgettable, you need to turn that silence into a loop, a thought they can't escape, an energy they keep returning to. Have you ever noticed how the people you ignore start thinking about you more? That's the loop, the echo, and when used right, it becomes a prison they build for themselves. You say nothing, and they start writing mental novels, trying to decode what your silence means. Did I do something wrong? Why did he stop replying? Why is he so calm? They replay every moment, every word, every breath, because silence, when intentional, becomes a psychological hook, and Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. The prince who vanishes creates a presence larger than the one who remains. You don't need to chase. You just need to remove yourself. Strategically, your absence becomes gravity. It pulls their thoughts back to you, not because you're available, but because you're not, and the brain hates uncertainty. People will do anything to close a loop, even sabotage themselves. That's the power of withdrawal. You don't argue. You don't correct them. You don't offer clarity. You become the question they can't answer, the silence they can't fill, the presence they can't replace. And every time they wonder what happened to you, you gain power, not through persuasion, but through tension. Because when they can't read you, they obsess over you. And when they obsess, you control the frame. That's not manipulation. That's Machiavellian gravity. You don't force them to think about you. You create space, and they do it to themselves. He who cannot be predicted cannot be controlled. And the unpredictable man is never ignored. Now imagine building your entire identity around this gravity. Imagine showing up only when it serves you, and vanishing the moment your presence is no longer valued. That's not being distant. That's being deliberate. And once you master this loop, you don't need noise. You don't need validation. You only need silence and timing. But silence can't just stir thought. It must trigger collapse. And that's what we'll build next. They used to praise your kindness, your availability, your willingness to always show up. But now, as you fall silent, they don't know what to do with the void. And that's when it hits them. They never loved you. They loved what you gave them. Your comfort, your presence, your obedience. And now that it's gone, their emotions collapse. Not because you hurt them, but because you've disrupted their illusion. They thought you were safe, predictably, owned. But when you go silent, they face themselves. Silence doesn't confuse the strong. It terrifies the manipulative, because your silence becomes a mirror, and what they see in that mirror isn't your absence, it's their own dependence. They lash out. They say you've changed. They call you arrogant, cold, cruel, but they're not mourning your absence. They're mourning their loss of control, because when you were predictable, they could summon you, they could guilt you, they could lean on you like a crutch. But now, you're a void, and voids are terrifying, not because they hurt, but because they force reflection. This is when their persona cracks. The polite mask collapses. The false friendship disintegrates. You were never seen. You were used. And now your silence forces them to sit in the discomfort they spent years outsourcing to you. No more explanations. No more fixing. No more being the emotional butler. They call it betrayal. But it's not. It's truth revealed through absence. You didn't change. You just stopped playing your part in their play. And without your character, the script falls apart. They don't fear losing your love. They fear losing their control over your response. So let the collapse come. Let it shatter their illusion. Let them drown in the silence. They once told you didn't matter, because only in the breakdown does the truth begin. And in the next move, you won't just protect your power, you'll make it permanent. There's a law you were never taught, a truth hidden beneath all the noise of being liked. The man who is always accessible is never respected. You thought your quick replies showed commitment, that your kindness built connection, that your presence made you valuable. But Machiavelli would smirk, because when you're always there, you train people to believe you'll always be, and when people expect you, they stop appreciating you. Your predictability becomes your prison. Your loyalty becomes your leash. The one who is always seen becomes ordinary, not hated, not rejected, just expected. And expectation is the death of value. This is the law of power Machiavelli lived by. Control access, manage presence, guard energy like a throne. Your time, your thoughts, your attention, they're not community property. They're not up for negotiation. They are assets. And not everyone qualifies. So from now on, you respond when it serves you. You show up when it strengthens you. You speak only when your words carry weight. Everything else is silence. You don't need to be mean. You need to be deliberate. You don't need to explain your boundaries. You just enforce them with presence or with absence. Because power isn't just in what you say. It's in what you choose not to say, not to give, not to tolerate. And when people ask why you've changed, you owe them nothing. Because the moment you start justifying your evolution, you invite their permission. And Machiavelli never asked for permission. He took it. He didn't perform for approval. He moved in silence. He built gravity. And when he appeared, people paid attention. That's the law. Power is preserved by scarcity, not kindness, not agreement, not availability. And if you forget that, you become entertainment, convenience, background noise. But if you live by it, you become consequence. And consequence is never ignored. Now that the law is clear, it's time to leave something behind. Something weaker, something older, so something greater can rise. There is a kind of pain that most men never speak about. Not the pain of failure, not betrayal, not loss, but the pain of silence. After you've finally withdrawn, you stop replying, you stop explaining, you step out of the roles they once assigned to you, and the world goes quiet. At first, it feels like freedom. Then, it feels like doubt. Then, it hits. The loneliness, the emptiness, the unfamiliar quiet, where their expectations used to live. You start questioning yourself. Did I go too far? Was I too cold? Did I burn bridges I might need someday? But that ache you feel, it's not weakness. It's detox. Machiavelli would never offer comfort here. He would offer clarity. He'd say, power is not born in applause. It's forged in isolation. Because this is not the pain of losing people. It's the pain of losing the version of you that needed them. The obedient version, the eager to please version. The one who stayed just to feel useful, needed, seen. You're not suffering from solitude. You're suffering from withdrawal, from the addiction of being expected, from the illusion of being liked. Every time you said yes to avoid tension, you said no to your soul. Every time you showed up just to be good, you stepped further away from being powerful. Machiavelli wouldn't sugarcoat this. He'd name it for what it is, a strategic death. Because until that obedient version dies, the sovereign one cannot emerge. So let it burn, let it ache, let it roar inside you like a funeral for the man you once were. Because what's rising in the silence is someone far more dangerous. Not a people pleaser, not a background character, but a sovereign force who owes no one an explanation. Carl Jung called this individuation. Machiavelli called it power. Not the kind you're given, but the kind you take from the hands of those who once fed on your need to be seen. This is your legacy. Not what they remember about you, but what you remember about yourself. When no one is clapping, now that man, he doesn't come back the same. There is a difference between being seen and being remembered, between being liked and being respected. Most men confuse attention with influence, but Machiavelli didn't. He knew. The prince who is always seen becomes ordinary, but the one who controls when and how he appears becomes unforgettable. Your presence used to be constant, predictable, always available, and that made you convenient, not powerful. Because what's always present loses its mystery. What's always accessible loses its value. You showed up before they even wondered. You replied before they missed you. You explained before they questioned. And in doing so, you trained them to treat you like background noise in your own life. But scarcity creates gravity, and absence, when intentional, doesn't make you invisible. It makes you unforgettable. You don't need to vanish. You just need to appear strategically, speak rarely, and your words become seismic. Show up only when it matters. and your presence becomes myth. Machiavelli would call this calculated absence, not to manipulate, but to protect your asset value, your time, your energy, your thoughts. These are not free samples. They are investments, and not everyone qualifies. So here's your new standard. Not everyone gets a reply. Not everyone gets an explanation. Not everyone earns your presence. The more they assume you'll show up, the more you must challenge that assumption. Because when they don't know where you stand, they start to feel your power. Think of gold. Its value isn't in how bright it shines, but in how rare, protected, and unreachable it is. So why should your attention be any less valuable? Why should your presence be handed out like a party favor? The man who is always seen is soon forgotten, but the man who chooses when to enter, how to speak, and when to vanish, becomes a presence they fear to waste. This isn't arrogance, it's sovereignty, the behavior of kings, of rulers, of men who don't exist for convenience, but for consequence. So ask yourself, every message, every meeting, every moment, is this person earning my presence, or just expecting it? If they're expecting it, you disappear. If they're not ready, you vanish. Not out of cruelty, but out of command, because from this point forward, your attention is currency. Your presence is leverage. Your absence is a reminder. And your silence, that's no longer space. It's a weapon.